Well, if you've watched this channel for any amount of time now, you know that we have visited spots of historic interest all over the world. As far as World War II, we've been to the beaches of Normandy and to the Ardennes Forest, and to the Pacific, to like Saipan and Guam and Tinian. As far as the Civil War goes, we've been to Antietam and Gettysburg and a number of other battlefields. But one big gap on this channel has been the American Revolution. So today we are in the city of Boston, which is kind of the epicenter of where all of the trouble started for the American Revolution. And right here is the old State House, where a bloody snowball fight was going to serve as the spark for a revolution that was going to change the world. Right here, among all of these modern buildings, is this structure right here. This is the old State House, and it is the oldest surviving public building in Boston. It was built in 1713, and during the colonial era served as like the British House of Government Offices for the Massachusetts Bay Colony. There was an old town house here, but it burned down, I think, in 1711, and then this structure was built just a few years later. So if we would have been residents of Boston during the 1700s, well, this would have been kind of a hive of activity. The people would have met here to exchange news, to exchange economic ideas, and I cannot overstate the importance of this building historically. John Adams said that within the halls of this building, this is where independence was born in the United States. John Hancock rented warehouse space below this building. And it was also right here, kind of on the left-hand side of the building from where I'm standing right now, where the infamous Boston Massacre took place. Now, before we go inside and start talking about the Boston Massacre, I think it'd be good to give a little bit of context as to what was going on in Boston in the 1760s. So following the French and Indian War, the British started imposing taxes on the colonies to help pay off some of their war debts. And to have walked these streets in the 1760s, there would have just been people angry all the time. They were being taxed on paper, they were being taxed on china and on tea and on paint. It seemed like every time they turned around, they were being taxed. And it wasn't so much the taxes, I mean, that was an issue too, but they were being taxed without having any representation in Britain. So they didn't feel like they had like any say over their own fate here. So there was a whole lot of unrest in Boston. Boston looks way different now than what it did back in the 1760s, geographically. This was almost an island, so there's already an independent spirit here. There was a lot of unrest, there were riots from time to time, and a British military general by the name of Thomas Gage was commissioned to send in 4 regiments of British soldiers to occupy the city and kind of quell the unrest. And there was going to be a lot of tension between these British soldiers and the American colonists who were living here in Boston. We've moved around to the other side of the old State House, and this historic structure here in Boston now serves as a museum. So we're going to go in and take a look at what they have inside and see what we can learn here at the Old State House Museum. All right, so just now making our way into the museum here. And here in the museum, they've transformed this space to interpret the transition from colony to independent country. So we're in the old state house, which, as I said, was the seat of government for the British in this colony. And looks like they have a few artifacts here. This is a speaker's desk. Looks like it was made by a cabinet maker named Benjamin Frothingham, and was made for the House of Representatives. And then here is an inkstand from the Representatives Hall. Yeah, fascinating. If we want a breakdown of some of the major players in the drama here in Boston, well, they have an information panel here telling about some of the principal characters. Okay, so one of them would be John Hancock. He's some of you might know him well for his signature on the Declaration of Independence. He was a wealthy merchant here in Boston, and was really a close associate of Sam Adams. The British are going to apprehend one of his ships called the Liberty, which is going to cause quite a stir. This here is John Adams, who would later go on to become president. Was a lawyer, tried a lot of very important cases. This one right here is James Otis Jr. So if you've heard the phrase taxation without representation, he is the one who coined that phrase. And then here we have one of the big troublemakers here in Boston, Samuel Adams. He is going to really emerge as one of the principal leaders of the Sons of Liberty, and is going to do much to lead a lot of resistance against the British. And this guy right here, you may or may not know, this is Thomas Hutchison. He served as the governor in this area and was a British loyalist. And he is going to come into sharp conflict with a lot of these colonials on several different occasions. As a matter of fact, he's going to have a lot of his property destroyed by those angry colonials. Now, this is pretty interesting. I mentioned the Stamp Act, which was a tax that was levied on the people in the colonies that was very, very unpopular. Well, there was this thing in Boston called the Liberty Tree. On August 14th of 1765, a bunch of angry colonials had an effigy of a man named Andrew Oliver, who was a stamp collector, and they hung his effigy from this tree. And later on, it became known as the Liberty Tree. The Sons of Liberty, which was a resistance group, they would hang their flag to announce their meetings. When the Stamp Act was repealed in 1766, well, there was a lot of celebration here in Boston, and over 150 lanterns, including this one that you are looking at right now, was hung from the Liberty Tree. Now, that Liberty Tree wasn't going to last. During the siege of Boston, British soldiers ended up chopping it down because of its symbolic nature. One of the main reasons that I wanted to visit the old State House today was to see the site of the Boston Massacre. So we're going to be going outside in a little bit and taking a look at where this event actually happened, but take a look at this. This is a musket and bayonet that was picked up by a Boston printer and publisher named John Fleet right after the Boston Massacre. So he picked this up right there at the site. That is wild that they have this here. And then they also have on display a powder pouch that was carried by Elijah Wyman in the Revolution. And the first victim in the Boston Massacre is going to be a mixed-race individual named Crispus Attucks. He was half African-American, half Native American. Well, this is a copy of the coroner's report on Crispus Attucks. That is something else. They also have a display here talking about the Boston Tea Party, and they have a few relics from that as well. One of the participants in the Boston Tea Party was this guy right here. His name is Thomas Melville. He went on to be a major in the artillery during the Revolution. Well, during the Boston Tea Party, things were a little bit rowdy, and apparently some of the tea fell in Thomas Melville's boots. And he ended up, when he, I guess, shook out his boots later that night, collected some of it and put it in a jar or this little flask as a keepsake. Here is hat that belonged to Thomas Melville, and also over here, close by, we have the site of the Battle of Bunker Hill. Well, here's a musket that was found at Bunker Hill, as well as a cannonball and this sword. Yeah, pretty dang cool. Take a look at this. Now this is some of the belongings of John Hancock. Now if we look at this coat here, this coat is a reproduction. The original is in dark storage, but they took the exact measurements and you actually used 18th century techniques to reproduce this coat. And something interesting that we can learn from this is that John Hancock, probably standing around 6 feet tall. Now, what is original in here are these documents. So this is a bill of exchange that was drawn up by John Hancock in 1774, and there we see that famous bold signature. And down here, well, this is a letter of congratulations to John Hancock on becoming the governor of Massachusetts in November of 1780. This was on behalf of the people of Boston. And then right here they have another artifact. This was a snuff box that belonged to John Hancock that is said to have been gifted to him by his housekeeper, whose name was Elizabeth Brackett. So, yeah, all kinds of interesting stuff here in this museum. All right, we're going to dodge upstairs now and see what we can see up there. All right, just moved up into the governor's council chamber here at the Old State House. And to be honest, I don't know a whole lot about this building, but Lucy does. Lucy is visitor experience supervisor. Yes. Anyway, since she's a lot smarter than me and knows a lot more about this, she's going to kind of walk us through what happened here.
So we're standing in what was probably the most important building in colonial Boston. This is the townhouse, as it would have been called back then. But pretty naturally, Massachusetts was not a town, but now it is called the State House. And of course, Massachusetts wasn't quite a state back then either. In fact, it was a colony of Great Britain. And this was the seat of colonial legislature, this building right here. In fact, we're standing in the governor's council chamber here. This is where the king-appointed governor and his 28 council members would have met on a pretty regular basis to make decisions about the colony and proclamations off of our balcony over here. This is a reproduction of what it would have looked like here in this building, but you can imagine in 300 years, doesn't quite look the same. In fact, you may have seen our gorgeous rotunda. That in fact is from the 1830s. Back in the 1760s, it would have just been a plain hall, our representatives hall. That's where several hundred legislators from Massachusetts would have met and made decisions about the colony. They all would have been elected from around the colony as a representative body. Way over on our western front would have just been our Suffolk County courts. So this room is the really important one for our purposes here. In this room in 1761, a very famous case called the Writs of Assistance was argued by a man named James Otis Jr. The writs of assistance were essentially blank search and seizure warrants. You may remember that from our Fourth Amendment today. Blank search and seizure warrants that were pretty abusive to the people here in Massachusetts. And James Otis Jr. argued that they infringed upon the liberties that they had as British citizens, but ultimately the presider over the case, who would later be Governor Hutchinson, denied to stop using these writs of assistance. And John Adams later writes in his memoirs that it was there and then that the child independence was born. So certainly a significant case for here in Massachusetts. Jumping forward, it's also from this seat here that Thomas Hutchinson sends back the troops that have committed the Boston Massacre in 1770, and also here where he refuses to send back the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, the three ships carrying the tea that would ultimately be involved in the Boston Tea Party. About 200 years after that, we actually have Queen Elizabeth come and speak off of this balcony as well in 1976 for the bicentennial anniversary of the United States. And she says, "I think if the patriots like Sam Adams and Paul Revere would have seen a British monarch standing off of this balcony and being so well received, they would have been a little bit surprised. But," she says, "I think they also would have been happy that we came back together as friends and as free people to defend the very sentiments that the revolution was fought for." Now that's a bit of a paraphrase there, but the sentiment stays the same. So this building is significant in Boston's colonial history, but also keeps that significance up as we move forward into the 20th and 21st centuries.
There's something else in this room that is really historically significant that I want to point out. And it's this balcony right here. Now, it's locked up, so we can't go out there. But it's from this spot right here where the royal governor would come out and speak to the people on behalf of the king. So royal decrees and things like that would be read from this very spot. Well, this balcony took on a different role on July 18th of 1776. It was from right here that a man named Thomas Crafts read the Declaration of Independence to the people of Boston for the very first time. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things that the colonists were really taking issue with was the taxes and the lack of representation that they had in England. And if you look at this engraving, well, it shows 5 people who have obviously tarred and feathered a customs agent, and they're forcing him to drink tea. And here you can see they're standing underneath the Tree of Liberty, and upside down it says Stamp Act. There's a noose up there on the branch, and you can see people throwing tea off of the ship in the background. Okay, so this kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of just the I guess the temperature in Boston, how things were during this period of time. And to be fair, I can understand from the British point of view why they would send 4 regiments of infantry to try and quell the unrest here in Boston. All right, so we've moved back out in front of the old State House here, and it's right out here in front of the old State House, kind of in the direction that I'm looking now, where the Boston Massacre takes place. And when you're talking about the Boston Massacre, the first casualty, you could arguably say, was the truth. There was the British side of what happened, and there was the colonist side, and it was really confusing. And to help us sort all of this out, we have Deidre, who is also with the visitor experience staff here at the Old State House, and we've been talking for a while now, and she knows a lot more than me. So she's going to kind of help us sort out what happened here on March 5th of 1770. just for a moment, imagine that you're one of the citizens of Boston, and it's the night of March 5th, and people are coming out in droves, and they are angry. I mean, we're looking at the verge of a riot here in Boston. Well, somebody went and got the governor, Thomas Hutchison. He actually came out and stood on this balcony and addressed the crowd. And paraphrasing, said that he lived and died by the law, let the law work its course. Well, that kind of pacifies the crowd. It doesn't make everything better, but at least helps. And something else right here. If you look, they have a marker here that says Site of the Boston Massacre. Well, this is not the actual site, so it's a little bit deceptive. The actual site of the Boston Massacre is just down the road a little bit, kind of where the sweet green is. So there are some artist depictions of what happened here afterward, that were made afterward. There's an engraving by Paul Revere, and there's a big old bus. And anyway, in that artist depiction, you can see the old State House in the background. Now, the marker was originally right out here, kind of by this manhole, but it's kind of inconvenient to have a marker in the middle of the street, and you might have people going out there trying to get a picture and get, have something unfortunate happen to them. And anyway, the marker was moved right here. So a few symbolic things. There's a 5-point star that represents the 5 people who were killed, and then you can see there are like 11 spokes that are coming out. Those denote the 11 shots that were fired by the British. Right here, in front of the old State House. Okay.
So the Boston Massacre on March 5th, 1770 happened right out here in the intersection of what was called King Street back in the 1700s. This whole area, along with the old State House, was the center of town. And there's a teenage boy named Edward Garrick who enters the scene. And he's just hanging around. We had a lot of teenage boys, and they like to hang around the intersection here. And he catches his eye on a client of the wig master. And this client, he believes, never paid the wig master's bill. And he calls him out to it. You did not pay my wig master's bill. You are no gentleman. And that soldier didn't do anything. He walks away. Well, Edward Garrick sees another man within his regiment, the 29th Regiment of Foot, Hugh White, guarding the Customs House. Now today the Customs House isn't where the Boston Massacre marker is presently in front of the old State House. The Customs House was right just down here where the sweet green is today. And so Edward Garrick approaches him and says, that man is no gentleman, you are no gentleman, there's no gentleman amongst your regiment. Again, this is what's reportedly happened, and what people testify later on. And so they have an exchange, it's a heated exchange, and Hugh White clunks the kid with the butt of his musket. And this child goes down and screams out, reportedly, this man's trying to murder me, this man's trying to murder me. And people see what's going on, hear what's going on, and make their way in front of the Customs House. Reportedly later on, the mob starts to grow and grow. People are bringing objects with them, like clubs, sticks, canes, maybe even muskets. People start throwing things at the sentry because they're upset what happened to this teenage boy. Well, eventually, the grenadier on guard, doing his routine, sees what's going on and gets Captain Thomas Preston. Now Preston is just around the corner here at the headquarters of the 29th Regiment of Foot, and that grenadier alerts him to what's going on and commands him to get 6 additional grenadier men. They're told to fix their bayonets and go march and rescue the sentry, Hugh White. Well, that captain follows them, which is not normal protocol, so they make their way through the crowd and create a semicircle in front of the Custom House to protect Hugh White, and their bayonets are fixed at the crowd. those colonists are goading these soldiers to fire, reportedly saying, "Dare if you fire, why don't you fire?" Something to that effect. The crowd, and the reason why they can't get Hugh White, and that's why the soldiers were there in the first place, to extract Hugh White, to get him out of there, the crowd kind of convenes on them. So they're squishing and compacting the soldiers against the customs house.
So again, imagine that you were one of the Bostonians here on the night of March 5th. And right here, instead of a Sweet Green and a Bank of America building, well, there is a customs house. And this guy, Hugh White, has been basically pinned right here and has this crowd around him, and the scene is chaotic. It's dark. There are no gas lights, and again, we're just down the street from the old State House, and right out here, this crowd is getting even more and more aggressive. Now, a lot of people will say that it was a snowball fight that started this, and that's only really half true, because a snowball fight implies that there are people throwing snowballs back and forth. Really, it's the colonials who are pelting the soldiers with really whatever they can pick up and throw. And somewhere in the whole mix, a British soldier who is, surrounding Hugh White and trying to get him out, whether somebody threw something and hit him, or whether he just accidentally pulled the trigger, something right here in approximately this spot, a guy by the name of Edward Montgomery fires the first shot that kills an Afro-Indigenous man named Crispus Attucks. And then there's a whole lot of shouting. The captain, a guy by the name of Thomas Preston, shouts something. He said that he had told him, "Why are you shooting?" or something to that effect. Some people said that he ordered him to fire. And anyway, there's another volley of shots that ring out, and 4 others are going to be killed. Samuel Gray and James Caldwell. James Caldwell was hit twice. Are both hit and killed. And then Samuel Maverick and Patrick Carr are mortally wounded. And there's an additional 6 who are hit and wounded right here in this very spot. So after the events of March 5th, things didn't exactly quiet down here in Boston. You had people like Samuel Adams and John Hancock who were essentially trying to incite a rebellion. And things got to be so tense that eventually they ended up marching the soldiers really right down this street right here to get out of Boston and get to Fort Williams. The soldiers involved in the Boston Massacre right here were arrested. There was a trial. As a matter of fact, John Adams served as the defense for the soldiers because he wanted to make sure they got a fair trial so that there wasn't any repercussions from the British Parliament. And Captain Preston probably summed this whole thing up best. He said none of them were heroes. He says the victims were troublemakers who got more than they deserved. And the soldiers were professionals who shouldn't have panicked or something to that effect. But he said the whole thing shouldn't have happened. But it did happen. And the tremor that started right across the street here was going to be the first in the earthquake that would be the American Revolution.